onto the subject at hand today,
Okay.
which is anarchy in the home, or also peaceful parenting, either way you want to call it. I guess my thoughts on it are that anarchy is the thought that you own yourself. You know, there's no rulers or masters over you. And if you hold that principle to your heart, that there's no rulers or masters over you, it's something that also should extend to your children as well, you know, that to everyone. If nobody has a higher claim over your life, does anyone have a higher claim over your child's life than himself? And not to be confused with the idea that it's your job as someone who brought a child into the world to protect that person from any type of harm. So, you know, some people feel like, well, you know, the first response is, well, if your kid's running out into the road, well, I'm going to stop him from running out into the road because he's going to get hit by a car. It's my responsibility to keep him safe. And, you know what I mean, in all types of different ways, I'm going to keep him safe. But that doesn't mean that I have the right to be a ruler over him, even though he's just, like right now, he's 18 months child. So it doesn't mean I have the right to violate principles that I would use against you. So if I believe that it's appropriate for our relationship to have the non-aggression principle be a main principle in how we deal with each other, then why would I change that for my, you know, I mean, my child who I love more than anyone else, and start using aggression for him, towards him, to, you know, I mean, to promote behavior and obedience. And then, you know, it's also like we sit here and say, like, you know, there's areas where we should have civil disobedience, but at the same time you want your child to obey you for, you know what I mean, just because you said something. And the idea of free thinking should start at a very early age.
What is a pattern of free thinking? What does it entail to be a free thinker?
It entails using logic and reason to make your choice.
Okay. And how does one develop that? What is the best ways to develop logic and reason?
I think you develop that by living life and making choices. By seeing the world. What's your thoughts on how someone develops logic and reason?
Well, I would say that it's developed through a multifaceted approach, but I wanted to go to two different things. I got into all of this because of parenting. So I started doing the love and logic parenting classes when I was pretty young as a father. And that's kind of what got me into the mindset. And so I started learning about psychological boundaries and how to ask my children questions and how to let them come up with the answers rather than telling them the answers. But there were still rules in the household that they had to kind of align with, but they were like objective rules. They weren't subjective. And then the next thing to talk about is John Locke.
Just get back to you. Want to give some examples of the rules in the house, the subjective compared to objective rules that you have?
Well, like a subjective rule is, you know, it's like a moving target. It's like, you know, I don't feel like something, and we have to be careful not to make our preferences into objective truth. So a preference is a preference and an objective truth is an objective truth. And we often turn our subjective preferences into objective truths because we don't know how to get our needs met. And so in order to try to get our needs met, we make ourselves a victim, and now it's objective. And you have to stop doing this, or you have to do this because the whole planet is, you know, the whole family could die if you don't do it, right? And so this is why people make themselves sick when they self-sabotage. They make themselves a victim because they take their subjective preferences and they turn them into objective needs because they don't know how to meet their subjective preferences. They don't know how to turn them into a reality. And so that's a problem. And so love and logic, you know, says basically anything that somebody can solve for themselves, you let them solve for themselves. But you act as a facilitator, and you're not just hands off. You're a facilitator. So a parent really needs to do that. They need to be involved, asking questions. You know, like Tommy comes home from school and he goes, Dad, I got pushed at school. And you're like, oh no, what are you going to do about it? So instead of saying, well, you should go and tell the teacher, this, or you should go and do that, then you're now starting to ask them questions so that they can come up with their own solution. And then if I don't have a solution, then you can give like 4 or 5 possible solutions. And then you say, which one do you think you'll pick? And then they'll kind of come up with something that they're going to do. But this is subjective. They need to be able to figure that out on themselves. It's not this matter of, they would prefer they got along with people at school, but it's not a big deal. It's not objectively, they're not going to die from it. So they need to be able to distinguish this, and they need to come up with their own way of coming up with solutions. Also, the child needs to stop crying. Well, there might be an objective reason that the child is crying. We shouldn't just go and spank the child because, there's my preference is that the child stops, crying. Well, that's not an objective need. That's a subjective preference. And if I'm starting to spank the child to get them to stop, then that's bad. But now if a child is manipulating you or something, now there is a sense of that's aggression, and you can set boundaries on that. And so the self-defense principle kicks in because there's non-aggression principle coupled with the self-defense principle. And the father represents the self-defense principle, and the mother represents the non-aggression principle as far as archetypes. So these two need to kind of go hand in hand in the family, these two principles. And, anytime that the son or the child or any child starts getting aggressive, which is manipulation of any sort, then you can set a boundary on that and then issue a natural consequence for that boundary. But a natural consequence cannot be aggressive either. It needs to be defensive. So, for instance, a boundary, like a good boundary I give as an example that is non-aggressive and yet very defensive is there's a laundry basket and I'm going to put it in the central location. Everybody who puts their laundry in that central location by Sunday, I'll do that laundry. But I don't go around the house picking up laundry. I don't go into your rooms picking up laundry. I don't do laundry on any other day but Sunday. So if it's not in this basket by this time on Sunday, I don't do it. And then you'll have to figure it out for yourself the rest of the week. You'll have to live with that consequence. That's a natural consequence. So I was not being aggressive because I was just dictating my behavior. I only do laundry that's in this basket on this day.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
It's it sets boundaries instead of punishments, which is something that I definitely agree with. And I'm definitely not at that point in my parenting as my son's 18 months now.
Right.
So I'm still trying to figure out what goo goo gaga means.
Yeah.
And the boundaries that I'm setting are, even though you're kicking me and flailing your arms, you're still not going out to the street, and it's
right. That's the loving thing. And if you can do it emotionally balanced, where you're not angry when you're doing it, the key to setting a boundary is you're not angry. You're using defensive force to prevent them from running out into the street because the car is bigger. And in that case, you have reason, they do not. And that makes you a custodian of the law of reason. This is what I was going to talk about with John Locke. John Locke wrote extensively in his first book, his first treatise on government, book 1, where he was attacking the divine right of kings and making a case for self-rule and self-government. He talked about how, yes, it is okay. We are the custodian of our children until they reach an age, and he called it 21, where they fully develop the age of reason. But it is fully on you as a parent to help them develop their reason. And most parents don't do that. Obedience is not reason. If I say you obey me, that's not reason. You have to actually help them develop their reason. And if you don't, then you are actually failing your duty to prepare them for the real world.
Yeah. I think an important question for children to ask, and it was one when I was a child that I would ask, and is why?
Yes.
Why did I have to do this? And the response that I would get is because I'm the mother or because I'm the father, and I said so.
Yeah.
Which.
Well, and why is our source of power? The what, why, how. You start with what, that's knowledge. Understanding is why. And then the how is wisdom. And you can get from knowledge to wisdom, which is from your thoughts to your actions, by crossing the bridge of reason, understanding. And another word for understanding is empathy, because empathy asks why questions. Logic asks why questions.
Yes. And empathy is definitely important as a parent, because we've all been there as a child.
Yeah.
So to go back, well, what did what were things that I didn't like when I was a kid being raised up? Why would if you're going to be empathetic towards your own child, why would you continue the same cycle of violence that happened when you were a child?
Yeah. So there's 8 intellectual character traits and 8 intellectual standards through which we can seek to embody those traits and seek to keep our own thinking accountable with those standards. So for example, if I say, you're telling me a story and I say, I don't understand what you're saying. Can you please be more clear? Can you give me an example? I just held you accountable with an objective standard, so that there's a sense of accountability. Now you go, okay, yeah, I can give you a story that'll help better illustrate my point. Great. Boom. Now you became more clear and I held you accountable to become more clear. And it wasn't a painful process. And so we are either accountable to the law of reason, which is these objective standards and those kinds of things, or we'll be accountable to somebody else. We'll be ruled by somebody else. So if we can instill these objective standards in our children, they will self-rule, because they are now governed by the law of reason and not governed by man. But we have to be governed by something. We can't just have a void of governorship in ourselves. It's internal monarchy, external anarchy, or external monarchy and internal anarchy. But once we make ourselves subject to the law of reason, then the rest of the world will be anarchy, no rulers in relationship to us, because we have an internal monarch. And that monarch is the logos, which is the metaphor for Jesus, which is the metaphor for reason and the law of reason.
Right on. Yeah, I think it's definitely important to instill, to be your self-ruler at an early age, right? Because when a kid's 21, it's a little late to be learning that,
Right. No, they have to be fully developed by 21. That can't just be starting at 21.
Yeah, I mean, these concepts were things that I didn't understand until I was in my mid-20s, and there was definitely outside rule in my life up until then, and I was being ruled by at first, mostly by religion and religion, government. And these were things that I would look to for reason, and looking back on it, these are things that there is no reason to them. So I was an unreasonable person because of that.
Right.
And it's everybody wants children who are well behaved. Obedient would be nice too. If you say something, they want to listen to it. But it's not the when you think that's what you want as a child, but is that what you want as an adult? And that's what you're raising. You're raising future adults. And
the only thing I want my children to be obedient to is reason. So if I say something reasonable, they're accountable to that, not to me. I'm just the vehicle for that reason. So like my wife and I, we have this kind of relationship where we argue a lot, but we use reason and we use objective standards and stuff. And so we'll kind of pick at each other and we'll kind of come to, I'm the thesis, she's the antithesis, and then we come together and we create a synthesis together in what's called dialectical thinking. And so this standard is not like, she's not obeying me. She's obeying reason. I'm not obeying her. I'm obeying reason. And that's the only thing. So a lot of people think, well, it's reasonable. It's like, just go out of your way a little bit. No, it doesn't mean it's reasonable because it's, not a little bit out of your way. It's reasonable because it's objective. It's like, I just have a reasonable request. Can't you just pay just, 5% of your income to taxes? It's reasonable. No, that's not reasonable. Theft is never reasonable, even at 1% or 0.5% or any kind of a percent. And especially if it's aggression. Now, if it's some kind of a voluntary tax system where we're voluntarily contributing for something that we want and that's going to directly benefit us, then that's different. That's an agreement. But
Yeah,
that's like a
reasonable.
preference thing.
Definitely.
So I think the important thing is that obedience is to the law of reason and the law of reason alone and not to each other. I obey the law of reason, and then those people in my life obey the law of reason. But I am never subject to somebody else, only to the law of reason within them. So if you say something and we're having a discussion, you say something that's very reasonable, and you change my mind on it, which you did on our last conversation several times, I wasn't obeying you. I was listening to the reason you were giving. And I felt that what you had to say was reasonable. It was logical.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. So what are your thoughts when in parenting when it comes to medical-type stuff with your children? Like, personally, I think that you shouldn't violate your child's consent. Is one of the biggest ones for me is people violating their children through circumcision. And I think that it's, it's something that there's not evidence out there that it's medically necessary at all. It's my son's body, it's not mine. And I don't feel I have the right to violate his consent and cut his penis. And then also vaccines would be another one where if he at some point in his life wants to put a mixture of different poisons and viruses in his body to protect him from viruses, then that can be something that he can do.
So you're talking about like with vaccinations?
Vaccinations and circumcision.
Well, let's put it this way. Mandatory vaccinations, any which way you look at it, is wrong. So mandatory vaccinations that's issued by the government or the government's making laws about it, obviously that's wrong. So starting from that point, anytime that's an assault on a personal right to our own space and body, no matter how much it's for the children, it's not. I mean, it's a slippery slope of tyranny. So,
right, and I definitely agree with that, but I would take it one step further and say that as a parent, that's not your right to be making those choices for your child either, especially with how little evidence there is that there's any help. Like the big one they go to is the polio vaccine, which polio is almost eliminated. Like if you look at the charts of how big of a problem polio was before the vaccine came out, you can see that right before the vaccine came out, it was almost completely eliminated.
Right, because of sanitation.
Right. So they use it as this vaccine eliminated polio, but sanitation had already almost completely eliminated polio, and sanitation was getting further advanced at this point. So, and you go to country, like it's not really eliminated either. You go to countries where they're drinking water out of the streets that's been sitting stagnant. There's polio still that exists there. And it's not the evidence isn't there, even though that's the big one, that's the big claim that's made. And I don't believe that you have the right as a parent to make that choice for your kid to inject him with poisons and viruses.
I don't think it's between, I think that the parent, I think that I don't disagree with you, but I disagree with you. And it's just a semantic issue. It's just where is the issue at? I don't think the issue is between the parent and the child. I think the issue is between the parent and the state, because the parent has the law of reason and is subject to that, but the child hasn't yet developed reason. Therefore, they are a custodian of the parent who has the law of reason. If they're actually reasonable people. If they're not, then it's children raising children, and that's a whole new thing. But if you have an adult that is actually an adult intellectually, emotionally, and that kind of thing, and they are a self-governing, self-responsible individual, and they have a child, they can make those kinds of choices for their children based on the fact that they have the law of reason, and because they're going to do things, they're subject to the law of reason, and they're only going to do reasonable things for their child. They're never going to do something unreasonable for their child. Now, vaccinations are not reasonable, so there's no reason to do them for the child. There's so much literature out there that casts a shadow of doubt on the reasonableness of it. Plus the fact that it's, they're using coercion and trickery and fakery and propaganda to try to get people to do it. That's like 1,000 no's. That there's no way I'm doing that for 1,000 different reasons to my children. So it's not that I'm violating my child's consent. I'm just not going to harm my child because it's not reasonable, because the law of reason says no. Do you know what I'm saying? It's not that I'm violating my child's consent. They're trying to violate my consent, and I'm not going to let that happen because my job is to defend my child from them.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I do think that there's areas where your child cannot consent, and you have to make that consent for them. And it could be, you know, I mean, taking them to the hospital for something if, you know, if he splits his head open, or so. It's not that you shouldn't be making any medical decisions, but
Right.
like you said, vaccines are completely unreasonable.
Yes. I can't find a single reason to actually do it.
Yeah. And then the, as far as circumcision goes, I find that even more unreasonable, as it's a torture procedure on children, where and there's no evidence for the sanitary reasons that they give, that there might be some sort of infection that happens.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't believe that a parent has the right to make that decision for their child, especially, you know, a lot of it's done based on religious belief system.
Right.
You know, that God told them to torture their infant.
Right.
And
that, again, I think that's the same argument as vaccines, that you have to judge it via the, you know, what's reasonable, what's objective, what's not reasonable, what's not objective. And then from there, you have to make a choice based on that. And I mean, if there's some kind of a metaphor in it, great. But I think that you could use the same argument that I just made for vaccines for circumcision.
Yeah.
Because there is no health I mean, look at, in Europe, they've been doing it they haven't been, you know, circumcising children. There's no problems here.
Right. And then so I'm opposed to the violence of the state, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you know, if somebody's abusing their child, there comes a point where somebody should step in and not allow people to abuse their child. In the United States, it's become illegal. I think it was like 94. It became illegal to circumcise females in the United States, which before then, little girls were getting circumcised as well. Do you think that there's something that should be done about that amongst the people to stop this violence to children?
Well, in the same way that, like, I'm in this group called the Classical Liberal Society, and somebody tried to make the argument that, and it's kind of related to what you're talking about, so, but it's not fully related, but it's the precedent. They were saying that child labor laws were fixed because of government regulation. But that's looking at government as a cause and not effect. It's the people that are the cause, and the government just happened to be the tool that was used to enforce the will of the people in this instance. But it was already going to go by the wayside because public opinion was already going that way. You don't necessarily need laws to outlaw something that is, or to regulate something just because, you know, that's just a tool. It's not the actual cause, and the cause is the people. And so in the same way, then I would say that, yeah, I mean, it's the people have to start coming to an awareness within themselves first that this is not acceptable behavior. And as that awareness starts permeating who they are, and they understand the reasons why it's not good, they have to have a why. It can't just be because I said so. But once they have the why and they understand why it's not a good thing, then it's going to start dissolving, and it's not going to be happening as much. And then there is a sense of, yeah, I mean, we have to defend the indefensible. We have to defend those that cannot defend themselves.
Yeah, it's something that will eventually consciously spread.
Yes.
But there's I feel with this particular issue, there's going to be a wall that's built there, and it's you can see it if you speak out anything against Israel, you're your channel might get your channel banned from YouTube, or different types of censorship, or you'll be called an anti-Semite. And with this being a primarily Jewish practice, I feel like that's going to be a really tough message to spread if you tell somebody that torturing their infant baby is something that's morally wrong. Then this is an attack on a culture or religion, when in reality it's not an attack on anyone.
Well, I think we need to get to a point where it's anything is subject to being discussed. Anything, we have to be able to discuss the validity of something. Is this reasonable? And we have to be able to attack anything that isn't reasonable. But we also, it's like you have to pick your battles and start with the ones that are probably going to be the best avenues in, right? So like one of my things is I want to teach people how to do Socratic dialogue, because I think that's a very powerful tool at waking up minds and helping people become more conscious. Just in relationships and romantic relationships, etc., between parents and children, all of that kind of thing, that if more people did Socratic dialogue, the world would be a better place. And then we could take that kind of methodology, that kind of a dialogue, that kind of way of talking and dissecting things, and then we could start examining whether or not these things are moral. And it's like, if we don't have the tools for it, there's no way that we're going to even be able to discuss it properly, because the way that everything gets discussed today, let's have a discussion. Isn't it just reasonable? But nobody knows how to reason. And so these discussions can't really go anywhere. And that's that wall that you were talking about. And it's not just a wall because it's religion. It's a wall because people's thinking, and they think that you can't challenge religion, and they think that you can't. Did you know that the word suffer is the legal word for consent?
I didn't know that.
So if you suffer through something and you are suffering through something, that means that you implied consent by not stopping it. Because if you would have stopped it, you would have no longer been suffering.
Well, people suffer with, because somebody's stronger than them and they can't stop them from violating consent. Mm-hmm. So that's consent if you can't stop somebody?
Yeah. But there's different ways to stop it. But there's like, okay, so you're doing implied consent because you're afraid for your life. But there's still an element of consent into it. But in the word that is also a synonym for that is tolerance. So when they're saying we need more tolerance in society, what they're actually doing is they're trying to get your consent for something. So we need to tolerate this religion. What they're doing is they're saying you need to suffer through whatever this religion is doing, because then you're consenting to it. And that is the legal thing. And this is their mindset. Now, it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. That's their mindset. And that's what's so amazing about what Alina and I have developed, is we help people remove their suffering by setting a series of boundaries. So they can set a bunch of intellectual boundaries and stuff like that to get to the point where they're untouchable, unfuckwithable, so to speak. And I think that's very important. So you have to remove your suffering to remove consent, because I guarantee you that the puppet masters and the people who are in the high up levels of things, they're using very specific terminology and words, especially like the word tolerance, because they want you to tolerate other religions, because they want you to give consent to them.
Yeah, I used to have the mindset that Judaism and Islam were two things that you couldn't talk about. Mm-hmm. And Christianity was an okay topic.
Right.
But I already told you my Christmas Eve story. I realized that there's this, I feel like it's even more hidden with Christianity. But once you start speaking out against it, you'll learn that that's also an untouchable religion as well. Mm-hmm. I think it's more of a deeper psychological untouchable for people who were brought up in it.
Yeah. Well, they're like ingrained in tolerating it. They're giving so much consent to it. They're not even realizing they're suffering.
Yeah. Well, something that I was told growing up is my mom would always tell me, I don't care what you do. I don't care if you're a trash man, which, I mean, not that I think trash man is a terrible occupation, but that's just her
Wording.
her metaphor. Yeah. I don't care if you're a trash man, just as long as you're doing it for the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that I didn't fully understand the implied tolerance, like what you're talking about, until I made a video speaking out against Christianity and had the whole family turn on me over it.
Right.
And I realized that there is, you know, I mean, it's more than it was more than just a little speech she was giving me. There's a lot of meaning to it. There was
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of baggage.
Psychological boundary there for me.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of baggage tied up in it. There's a lot of implications, so to speak, that go unsaid, underlying assumptions that you just don't realize when you're growing up with that kind of a thing. I grew up Christian as well. So Southern Baptist was my grandfather was a Southern Baptist pastor, which ironically, he was the most open of everybody that I was talking to when I would ask him about things and tell him my doubts about things. He was the one who had the most conversations with me.
I think that's good that was willing to have conversations.
Yeah. And in fact, he, anyways, I won't get into that. I was going to say something I probably shouldn't hear for this. It's getting a little woo-woo.
A little too personal for YouTube?
No, a little too woo-woo for YouTube. But yeah, I have a lot of respect for my grandfather, and he had a theology doctorate. He had a doctorate in theology in Christianity from Southern Baptist University. And yet he was the most open to discussing with me about my doubts. Out of everybody in my family.
Yeah. Yeah, my family, I mean, the conversations don't go too far. It's, you know, a lot of, you should have blind faith and, you know, believe it because the Bible says it. Things like that. So yeah, it's a lot of stuff built on this, you have to have this fundamental principle that the Bible is God's word and true. And then, yeah, I mean, since I don't have that, yeah, I mean, it's just,
it's really just an external versus an internal viewpoint on the whole thing. Have you ever heard of what's called locus of identity or locus of control?
I have not.
Okay, it's a psychological principle of where's your internal voice? Is your internal voice in here, or is the voice out there? And it means, are you internalized or are you externalized? Are you an internal person or an external person? When you experience a problem, did the devil make you do it, or did you make that choice, and are you willing to own it? You know, it's like we're blaming others. God is either to blame or the devil, or we're taking ownership for ourselves. And this whole viewpoint that religion has now is externalized, but it didn't used to be like that. Even if you read like John Locke was very Christian. But if you read his stuff, it's not like reading anything a Christian today would say, because he was internalized. He was talking about the law of reason. He's talking about, you know, being a good steward to God. And he wasn't talking about the sky man. He was just talking about, he was one of the people that really nailed in the concept of natural law. He was one of the people that really, really focused. All of his philosophy is based on natural law, and he developed the philosophy of natural law in many ways. And yet he was a Christian. But how could that be? It's because he was an internalized person rather than an externalized person. And the whole sky man thing, that's the externalized look. They're not subject to the law of reason. And he's saying God is the law of reason. God is the law of reason. And you have to be subject to God, and God is the law of reason.
Right. So along with my story of growing up and being told that, you know, I mean, as long as, no matter what I'm doing, as long as it's for Jesus or, you know, following the Bible still, it doesn't matter. I feel like I'm just susceptible to making these same mistakes with my child. And, you know, I have things that I would prefer him not to be, right? You know, I mean, I could say, as long as you're not a cop or in the military, you know, or, you know what I mean? Like that would be somewhere where if he went down that road, it would be very disappointing to me. But at the same time, I don't want to make these psychological boundaries for him where he feels like he needs to make decisions not to go down those career paths in order to, you know, because everyone has a desire to fulfill their parents' wants. You know, they want to please their parents. It's natural. But then I don't want his natural desire to make me happy and to be a good son to interfere with him making choices based, you know what I mean? So how do we set boundaries without making psychological boundaries that could potentially be harmful to your relationship with your child? Or
well, let's first define boundaries, psychological boundaries. Psychological boundaries are never harmful because it's the self-defense principle. Your own psychological boundary is always self-defense principle. What you're talking about is rigidly telling somebody what to do and using manipulation and pressure, and that's aggression. I say that's trespassing on your child's boundaries. And if they are now making decisions based on what they think you want, that's because they feel trespassed upon and they don't want to feel punished. They want you to be happy, that kind of thing. So that's the aggression. That's aggression. So you don't want to be aggressive towards your child. So with that said, I can definitely tell you that I have that experience because my son is Special Forces.
Your son is what? I'm sorry, missed it.
Special Forces.
Okay.
He's Airborne Ranger. And I had a very big struggle with that, but it's his decision. And I can't make him do anything. I can't. In fact, I didn't even really voice my displeasure because he has to make that choice for himself. It's not a choice I would have made. But actually, I did join the military. I joined the military when I was right out of high school. I was in the Air Force, but it did not go over well for me at all. I had too big of a why. I got punished again and again and again for asking why questions. But that's who I am. I ask why questions. And they couldn't punish that out of me. But so I was like, oh, but apparently he has to learn this for himself. He has to figure that out. Okay, fine. The point is that it is very difficult. But you just have to let them be free at a certain age to make their own mistakes and figure it out for themselves. And if that mistake costs them a leg, if that mistake costs them, you know, some guilt because they murder somebody or they aggress against somebody, they're going to have to deal with that and they're going to have to be accountable.
Yeah. I definitely feel like if I make these type of psychological aggressions, as you said, I was calling it boundary earlier, but that sounds more accurate. If I make these type of assertions on him,
yes,
then if he's anything like me, that's exactly what he'll end up doing anyways.
Yeah.
You know, it's I think pretty futile. If, you know, I mean, if he's as stubborn as a person as I am.
Right. He has children. You know, this is the thing with love and logic. They say, do the boundaries with your children and hope they make mistakes so that you can then give natural consequences for those mistakes. And a natural consequence is not a punishment. A natural consequence is like, for instance, my son, when he was little, he punched out the screen door. Well, he had to we had to get him to borrow money from us. So he had to give us in collateral a Game Boy that it was his. And then we gave him the money and we had to go to the store and he had to talk to the people about getting the screen. And then he had to pay my dad to fix the screen. And after that was all said and done, that was a natural consequence for his actions. Now, he did not get cruel and unusual punishment. He didn't get spanked. He didn't get grounded. He only had to go through this whole process of borrowing money from us with collateral and then paying for getting that fixed. Now, if he had the money, he just would have spent it on me. But you know what I'm saying? So we went through the process, so he had to experience a natural consequence.
Right. Yeah. There's consequences to your actions.
Right. Right.
So I'm definitely in agreement with you on not using punishment for your children. Was there ever a time that you did use punishment on your children that you know what I mean? Was there a time that you came to that, or is it just something that you came to before having children?
No, you know what? I was thinking about the whole spanking thing, and I was okay with it at first. But as I was learning about my children and going through experiences with them, we came to some very big contrasts. And contrast, as you know, kind of pulls you back like a rubber band until you snap, and then you have to do something about it. You know, you have to figure out what's going on. And as a result of that stretching through a divorce, because I got a divorce, and this whole process of divorce and the friction that happened between the two parents caused a lot of tension on the children. And at that point, I said, you know what? I thought I was a great parent, but obviously I'm not. I don't have the tools to be able to cope with a divorced child, you know, a child of divorce. I might have had the tools to cope with a child that was not in a divorced family, but I don't have the tools with a divorced family. So that's when I started taking classes. But it was through a lot of problems that I made that choice.
Nice. I watched this video recently on YouTube of this guy talking about punishment and like why you would punish. Somebody asked him about punishing his children, and he said, you know, there's two objectives with your children for why you would punish them. The one is, you know, what is it that you want your child to do? And when you think of it just like that, it's something that you come to the conclusion that punishing them would be appropriate. And then the second question you ask is, why do I want them to do it? And when you think about that, then you have to throw out the idea of punishing them, because you don't want the reason for your child to be doing something is because daddy said so.
Right.
You know, you want them to be doing it because they've learned reason and logic, and it's something that they realize they shouldn't be doing.
Because they have their own why. They've developed their own why.
Right.
And a natural consequence helps them understand why.
Yeah.
It's like, I hate to use school, but you know, if you lip off to a bully and you get punched, or if you lip off to somebody because you're being a bully and you get punched, there's a good natural consequence for the child to experience.
Yeah. I feel like one of the best learning experiences that I had growing up was, I was probably around 10 years old, and I went to 7-Eleven, and underneath the Slurpee cups, they had stick-on tattoos. Mm-hmm. Well, we all bought Slurpees, or my mom bought Slurpees for us. So I got out of the 7-Eleven, and I had 4 different of these tattoos. She said, now, David, you got 1 cup. How'd you get 4 tattoos? I took them from the other cups. What? That's stealing. We only bought this one. So she made me go back into the 7-Eleven, give back the tattoos, and apologize to the man at the counter for stealing the tattoos. That was something that was a life lesson that, I mean, I still haven't forgotten. And it's something that the idea of stealing, it engraved more so than any time that I got hit by a paddle.
Right, exactly.
Doing the wrong thing.
That's a natural consequence. You had to take ownership of this experience, and you had to experience the natural consequence of that choice.
Yeah, and it made a huge impact in my life, where, you know, possibly if I would have got hit for that, I would have known, you know, I mean, do things where you don't get caught so you don't get hit. But that right there is something, I mean, at this point I'm 34, and it's still engraved in my mind, that moment of going back into the store, staring up at that guy and handing back these tattoos and telling him I'm sorry for stealing his tattoos.
Yeah. There's a saying about, you know, Carl Jung said that somebody who comes to grips with his own shadow has become a problem unto himself. He's no longer a problem to society, because he's no longer projecting and blaming other people for his issues, that he's now owning them. And I think that's true. Love and Logic says that, you know, you're actually hoping and praying that your child make as many mistakes as possible, because each one of those little mistakes is a huge learning opportunity that is much better than if they have to go to jail for it when they're older because they didn't learn it as a child, or they have to, they have to go through a divorce and a bankruptcy for it because they didn't learn it as a child. So you learn it as a child when it's a very inexpensive natural consequence, or you learn it as an adult where it's a very expensive natural consequence. So you're hoping for your child to make as many mistakes as possible because you, as an attentive parent, are there to help them go through the natural consequences of each of their mistakes as a facilitator and as a advisor.
So some other thoughts that I had as far as anarchy in the home goes, and raising your parents or raising your children. The the main concept of anarchy is self-ownership, which is something that we should be instilling in our children. But the other concept is this idea of outside forces coming into the home. Is there a way of speaking of government as outside forces and government type agencies?
Are you talking about like school or social services type stuff?
So, social services, schooling. One of the things that we did to keep ourselves outside of government type forces in the hospital is we had our child at home. So things like that of keeping outside influences away from your home. Unschooling and home birth are two areas that me and my wife are really big on for keeping others outside and keeping our home home.
Working on the family, focusing on the family, staying, keeping the stability of the family unit.
What are areas that you see as ways to keep your home, within your family and not keeping outside forces controlling and manipulating the way your family runs?
Well, I think that the more reasonable you become as a human being, and you can practice that with your partner and with your children, the more reasonable you become, that the less susceptible you are to external influences in all of their different varieties, such as the medical cartels, wanting to give, shots and that kind of stuff. The schooling system and the schooling cartels, which wants to create uniformity and conformity of thought, to the, which you're talking about with homeschooling. I think maybe things like having pets and teaching responsibility for the pets, giving them kind of like some kind of authority, because obviously your pets don't have a law of reason. They're aligned with reason to a certain extent. They have their instincts and stuff like that, but they don't know preferences and stuff. So, giving them a puppy to have to be responsible for and helping them to experience what it is like to be responsible. I don't know, just being able to do conflict resolution with your wife, with your partner, to an extent that it models for the children. When a child sees that the parents are subject to the law of reason, when they say that, the dad or the mom can both say, oh, sorry, you're right. That was logical. I get it. I understand. And they're not being emotionally attached to the outcome. I think that all those things are really good for children to be able to see. But I don't, as far as outside things, it's like, you just got to keep doing what you're doing. And the more reasonable you become, I think the less influence those things are going to have. The more responsible, self-responsible you become.
One of the things that I feel is with our modern society is not looked at as an issue at all is having a television babysitter.
Right.
Which we personally don't put the TV on for our son at all. I mean, he's watched a few music video, live concerts is about the extent of his television in his 18 months. But as far as that goes, I don't know if you've heard of or seen anything. They call it Elsa Gate videos.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, we've actually helped a few friends and family to stay away from those.
Yeah, so that's something that, you know, kids as early as my son's age are, you know, sitting in front of YouTube watching these, which to the child is a funny Spider-Man video, but in reality, it's this strong outside force that's
Manipulating,
really, controlling your child's mind in ways that you can't understand. Like there's things that are very subtle, like the different colors they use that trigger different responses in your child's brain, and the different type of music that will trigger things that. So yeah, for me, a big protection and a boundary that we have is we don't use the TV. We play with Hot Wheels and.
That's good. Yeah, that's actually something that's a really good observation. There's so much propaganda in everything. I'll watch a cartoon every once in a while just to check out what they're telling the kids, and it's like, holy hell. And stuff that's in there is just awful, and it's not just awful as in like my sensibilities are upset. No, I mean, I can see agenda-driven things in all of these cartoons.
Yeah, and there's a lot of cartoons out there that are made for children who are, you know, I mean, they're set for children who are 8 years old, and these cartoons are highly sexualized with, you know, the little girls that are in the cartoon have short dresses and stockings that are up above their knees, and, you know, just things that are, you look at it and you think, well, your kid's not thinking anything about that, you know, because he doesn't understand, but you look at it and say, holy smokes, they're sexualizing this cartoon character.
Right.
Yeah, and it's not, you know, I mean, it's not Family Guy that's made for adults. This is something that was built for a little kid.
Yeah, I've read a lot about that. I'm not quite passionate about it because I don't have a child that age anymore. But even looking back at things like Miley Cyrus, and my children watch Miley Cyrus on Disney Channel, and then all of a sudden they sexualized her immediately. She flipped and became, you know, dildo wearing pop star.
Yeah, and there's a pattern with the Miley Cyrus thing too. I mean, there was Christina Aguilera before her and Britney Spears before her, and it's I don't know who it is now, but there's another little girl right now that they're grooming to be the next person that they flip into a sexual icon for children.
Yeah,
just like they did with Miley Cyrus.
Yep. Yeah, it's and Disney's all square in the middle of that. But Disney had ties to the CIA long time ago.
Yeah.
Around when the creation of the CIA, actually.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of government mind control that goes into the television.
You know, there's a saying that the world nuclear weapons are, you know, they're so destructive, but they're just brute. The real weapons nowadays are all psychological. We could be square in the middle of World War III and nobody would even know it, realizing that the weapons of war have changed. The weapons of war have nothing to do with what they used to have. They're not guns, they're not nukes. The real weapons of war nowadays are all psychological.
Yeah, and they're doing the same kind of programming to the adults too. You know, they got the Disney Channel for children, they have Fox News and CNN for the adults.
Or Netflix. I've watched all kinds of things on Netflix, like Sabrina, the Teenage Witch. Oh my God, that's just normalizing cannibalism, pedophilia, and Satanism. But we watch these things for, we don't have a child in the house, but we watch them because we are looking for agendas. We're looking for those kinds of things that are truisms, because they base things on truth, just enough to give it the candy coating so that whatever they're sending as a message can go down.
Yeah.
But yeah, Netflix is pretty bad. And they have a whole bunch of teenage shows. So like Sabrina and Riverdale, I guess it's called. All these kinds of shows are geared towards teenagers.
Yeah, there's the one Bird Box just came out.
Oh yeah.
You seen that?
I have not. That one I can't wait to miss.
Yeah, it's I watched it with my wife, and then afterwards, you know, it's very, very subliminal, the different messages they're sending, where I wasn't watching it to pick anything up. I was watching it because I get forced to watch scary movies with her because she likes watching them, but she doesn't like watching them by herself. So
Right.
there's, yeah, I mean, it's like my least favorite genre of movie, but somehow I'm always watching them. So, every once in a while, I'm able to force her to watch a comedy, so it works out.
Right.
But this movie, I watched it just not consciously looking for anything. And when it was all said and done, I didn't pick up any messages from it. But then on my YouTube stream, there was a channel that I'm subscribed to, Black Pill, who did a breakdown of the movie. Mm-hmm. So I watched his breakdown of the movie, and I was thinking at first when he started going on with the liberal agenda, I was like, you know, I usually pick up on different agendas when I'm watching these TV shows. And like there's a lot of times when I watch movies, it gets to a point where it irks me watching it, you know, because I can see the different agenda. Mm-hmm. But then after watching his breakdown of it, it was it was very clear the subliminal message that was going on about, you know, the evil white man that's, you know, going to get you. And there was the two black characters who are both the heroes of it that set forth the, you know, the racial the racial message that's being pushed out there that, you know, white men are bad, and just you know, the different very subtle messages that are being pushed and agendas that
a lot of Marxism, critical theory, and deconstructionism going on.
Yeah. And it's something that, I mean, I feel like if I wasn't able to pick it up as, you know, watching it the first time, nobody else is picking that up either. You know, there's a few people.
Well, the subconscious mind is, of course, and that's what they bank on. They're becoming so slick in some of the things they're doing. It's like Sabrina was kind of overt in some things. They're like intersectionality and, you know, the patriarchy, this, and, you know, I mean, that's overt. But then you get something like Bird Box, and it's so subtle. It's smooth, but the subconscious mind still picks it up.
Yeah. Definitely.
There was something I wanted to say. I forget. It was like 2 topics back, I think.
No worries.
Got any other good questions on? Oh wait, hold on. Oh, okay. I know one thing that you could do. Or I know that one thing that somebody could do if they really want to teach their kids to be self-responsible, and they can keep the government at bay in their lives. And that is a true liberal arts education. The 7 liberal arts, which is grammar, logic, rhetoric, and also mathematics, geometry, astronomy, and music. Those, so you have the trivium, which is the first 3, and the quadrivium, which is the last 4. And those things help people liberate their mind. That's why it's called the liberal arts, because they contribute to a liberated mind. And especially if you see a lot of the fallacies that are going on right now, they're grammatical fallacies and not just logical fallacies. So they're redefining all the words, like you're a Nazi now, you know, and you're because you're a white male and you're straight, you're obviously a Nazi. Well, they just redefined that word. They're creating grammatical fallacies. So if he who controls the premises controls the outcomes, because if all the premises are being given to you that are all these false words with no meaning that they've just arbitrarily come up with subjectively, and now the logic that you're going to come up with based on these, because we reason deductively, is going to come out with a lot of erroneous outcomes based on these false premises.
Yeah, the one that really gets me, I was doing an interview, something I do on my channel is going to different protesters and just interviewing random people. I went to a protest. It was Antifa on one side of the street with their signs, and then on the other side was the Proud Boys. So two groups of people who I am in strong disagreement with both of their philosophies and ideologies. So I was going in there and just asking them different questions. The one guy told me during the interview is, well, black people can't be racist. Right? So it's this new definition of racism, which racism now means to, if you ask a liberal-minded person what racism is, it's if somebody has political control over somebody else, or a majority control over a minority is the only way you can be racist. Yeah. So he was asking me, he said, I forget the guy's name, but he was a slave that ran away, came back and was killing white people. He said, you think this guy was a racist? I said, well, was he killing white people based on the fact that they were enslaving other people and he was doing that to free black people? And you know what I mean? He was fighting the aggression of slave owners? Or was he killing white people based on the fact that they're white? He's like, no, he was killing children who were white, and you know what I mean? Was he a racist? I was like, yeah, he's a racist. It doesn't matter what caused him to become a racist. If it was because, I mean, it doesn't make the fact that this guy was subjected to slavery for his whole life, it doesn't make that right, but it doesn't change the fact that he was now a racist based on that. Like, it turned him into one.
I had a unique insight into why that's happening and why they're coming up with that. It has to do with, I mean, it's a Marxist thing. It is definitely Marxist. But there's a subtle thing where they say that, you know, logocentrism is all about contrast. So you go through a contrasting experience. So you see a guy and a girl. There's a male and a female. And they come together, and the male is able to know his masculinity through the reflection of the female. And the female is able to know her femininity through the reflection of the male. And it's the contrast between male and female, that meaning, you know, it's like a male means nothing without a female, and a female means nothing without a male. It's like they bring meaning to each other, and it's all about meaning, and that's what logocentrism is. Well, they're saying that all contrast is only of the good, bad. So there's good and bad contrast. So like, I go through an unwanted experience. I don't like that experience. I didn't like that. I don't like, you know, having something bad, go through something bad. You know, I don't like being poor. I want to be wealthy. That's a contrasting experience also. But it's a wanted, unwanted rather than a male, female, which is just equals, right?
Yeah. I think that there's another word that they're polluting is masculinity.
Yes, toxic.
Yeah, this is something, the guy who I was talking to said the thing about blacks can't be racist. He also told me his sign said stop toxic masculinity or something along those lines. So I asked him, what is toxic masculinity? And I said, okay, and what is toxic femininity? No such thing. You know, well, you know, I mean, they couldn't come up with a definition for toxic. Like, if there's toxic masculinity, then there also is a toxic femininity.
And this is based on the thing that I was about to say about they say that all binaries are wanted, unwanted. Therefore, the male was the wanted and the female was the unwanted, and that's just discrimination. And then the white was the wanted and the black people, that's the unwanted, and therefore that's discrimination. So any contrast between anybody at all is discriminatory, where it's wanted and unwanted. So it doesn't matter. So it's like they've lumped it all together. All contrast is wanted, unwanted. And they haven't distinguished between the wanted, unwanted kind of contrast and the equals. So like, I can know and appreciate my race better through the contrast provided by other cultures. But it doesn't mean I have to assimilate into, you know, each culture into each other and make this, you know, blob culture. It just means that I can appreciate my culture more by going to Japan. And a Japanese person can appreciate their culture more by coming to America. That doesn't mean that they don't like our culture or we don't like their culture. It just means that it brings meaning to each of our cultures. But they've completely bastardized that by saying that it's always the wanted, unwanted, the oppressor and the oppressed. And if you have an oppressor and oppressed, you have Marxism.
Yeah.
the bourgeois and the proletariat. It's shit.
I think this discrimination is something that's looked at as being always negative too, where there's nothing wrong with discriminating at times. Like you're from Brussels. I don't like you guys as sprouts. I don't like Brussels sprouts. So yeah, I mean, when I eat, I discriminate against Brussels sprouts.
Right. Yeah, and that's the whole preference thing, right? There was a book called The Alienist and a movie called, or a Netflix series called The Alienist. But in the book, he said when they're doing something, he says, no, that's a matter of preference. That's subjective. You must be careful never to make the subjective into objective. Because what happens? You know, now all of a sudden, this subjective preference when it comes to sexuality or something is now all of a sudden an objective thing, and they're trying to make all people who aren't a minority objectively bad based on this preference.
Right.
Because they've confused the two.
I think the idea of minorities, it escapes you from the reality that everyone is a minority unto themselves.
Yeah, the individual, yes.
There's only one me with the way I think and the way I act. So to say that, because I'm a straight white male, that makes me a majority figure. Well, there's also other, there's a lot more that makes up somebody than these broad categorizations.
It's very superficial, isn't it?
Definitely.
And that's why it's racist. It's misogynist. I had one person say I was mansplaining, and I was like, "Get the fuck off! Leave! I am not dealing with you. You freaking You're a bigot. You're just a bigot. I can't be a bigot. Oh, you are a fucking bigot. Don't tell me I'm mansplaining when I'm giving you actual logical reason. Not mansplaining. That's called logocentrism.
Yeah,
I'm being logocentric. But see, my wife is just as reasonable as me. She's just as logical as me. In fact, she's what's made me so logical in the first place. Without her always challenging me, I wouldn't be who I am. And she doesn't mansplain.
She woman-splains to you.
Yeah, she gives reasons, just like I give reasons. And then we come together and then we hash it out and we figure something out together. And then whatever is objectively true, usually a little bit of mine, a little bit of hers, we kind of come to a higher understanding. That's called the synthesis. Oh, it's so annoying when you talk about the whole bigotry and mansplaining thing.
It's definitely a crazy world to be bringing a child up into, and to,
Yeah.
To teach him the true meaning of words, or to teach him, if there's mansplaining, what is womansplaining, or or if there is toxic masculinity, what is, to not have him be brought up in this mentality that, he's an oppressor of somebody because he was born white and male.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, no, he should feel guilty for that. White male guilt.
Yeah. I think that's definitely, we kind of got off subject, but it still is kind of on subject of, when raising your kid, how do you, in this world where they're being subjected to this type of brainwashing?
Well, yeah, the public schools are doing it tons. Public schools, the media. We have two friends where all of a sudden their children popped up having, trans. And it's happening at such a frightening and alarming rate now that children are questioning their gender identity. This is the whole thing. Oh, we were talking earlier about circumcision and making a choice for our children. A lot of people are letting their children decide their gender now, but then they're letting them decide their gender based on all these external influences, like their schools and their in the media and all this other stuff. And now 5-year-olds are able to determine what gender they are? No. When they're 18 and they've come into the law of reason within themselves, then they can decide. But they develop that.
It's there's this normalization of psychological child abuse.
Yes. And
there's a very popular child drag queen. I don't know if you've heard of him. His name is The Amazing Desmond, I believe, or Desmond, something like that.
I've probably seen something about it, yeah.
My wife was showing me these different videos they have of him. There's one where there's people interviewing him, and I think it's like Pew is the name of the channel, something like that. But he's doing an interview. There's a convicted murderer that is the one guy who was 17 years in prison for being a murderer, doing the interview. Behind the kid, there's a painting that says, in like weird writing, Respitol or something. I forget the name of the drug, but it's a date rape drug that's written in the painting. And this kid's sitting there talking about, how long have you been a drag queen? Since I was 6. I don't really remember much, saying things like that. There's another video where he's sitting on a couch with a drag queen, and they say something like, we're in the era where child drag queens is normalized. And then the kid says that, I believe, and then the drag queen behind him says, and we do ketamine on the couch. And the little boy takes his hand, like he's sniffing ketamine off of his hand. This is a, probably a 10 to 12-year-old boy who, I mean, at the very least, without making accusations that drag queen was drugging this kid with ketamine, at the very least understood that sniffing his hand was an action of what, when I was 12 years old, I wouldn't have a clue what ketamine was,
Right.
And at the very least, he understood how you would do ketamine and that people would make jokes about doing it with him. Not to say that he also looked like he was drugged up. Right. And, most likely that's what's happening.
Excuses for that. They're like, oh, how brave. Oh, how wonderful that a child like this can do that. It's like, this is legalized child abuse.
Definitely.
Normalized child abuse. And in fact, I think it's because if a child can make a claim that they're responsible enough to for their gender and to decide what gender they're going to be and then go under surgery and hormones and stuff like that, then it's not a far stretch to say that they're also responsible enough to decide if they want to have sex with an adult or not. And so I feel like this is leading towards legalization of pedophilia. They're taking it. It's a slippery slope. It's a very easy stretch, not a far stretch at all, to say, hey, if they're responsible enough to choose their gender, aren't they not responsible enough to?
Yeah, how much bigger of a sexual choice is there than having a surgery and having hormones?
Yeah, it's horrible. So I see that it's obviously not reasonable at all, but you can see them gradually going that direction through a technique called gradualism, political gradualism.
What do you think the solution is? How do we fight this? Is there more to it than just bringing it to light on a YouTube video?
Yes.
Is there? What's the steps we take to fight the perversion of our children?
I think Jordan Peterson's onto something. I think that he talks about clean your room, stop trying to worry about everybody else, and clean your own room. And what he means by that is we need to start working on ourselves. We need to take care of what we can take care of. And I'm not even talking about my literal room. He might be, but I'm saying we need to take care of ourselves. We need to start working on our psychological health, our emotional health, becoming more reasonable, because the opposite of being reasonable is being unreasonable. And unreasonable people they're unconscious, they're emotionally attached to things, they have these emotional attachments, they blur the subjective and the objective all the time. They have very little clarity. So if you can become more clear, if you can become more emotionally balanced and whole, if you can be a more reasonable thinker, if you can start becoming more objective in your thinking as far as taking objective standards such as clarity, precision, breadth, depth, those kinds of things, and placing them on your thinking, you become more fair-minded. All of these things are going to make you more of a responsible human being and a much bigger threat, to the system. And that's what Aline and we teach with the unity process, and what we teach with everything that we're working on is how to integrate that into the family, because the the greatest minority is the individual. And then after that, it's the family. And we need to start with balanced individuals, having balanced, solid families, and that'll lead into the community, and that'll lead into the greater whole. But you have to start with the individual and not with a knee-jerk solution of protesting or something like that, because that's collectivization. It's becoming a majority, trying to become one majority to fight another majority, and you're fighting fire with fire. You're becoming what you don't want to try to protect yourself from it, and that's.
Yeah, I think it was Gandhi that said, "Be the change that you want to see in the world."
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's something that it's been a truth out there for a long time, and it's just something I think it's hard to come to terms with, because one of the hardest things to do is change yourself. It's easy. It's definitely easy to look at outside and see that there's massive amounts of problems, and it's overwhelming because you can't really do anything about other people's actions and choices.
Right. But
you have complete control over your own mind. You have control over your own body.
Yep. And if you can, you have a partner that you can work with, and a family unit that you can work with, then you can start building from there. And that's what I've really built with Aline, is a solid family. And that's what I needed. I was a nomad before I met her, and meeting her and kind of being grafted onto her tree, because she had a very stable family life too. And being able to be grafted onto that tree and to build a foundation together with her, and the family is transformed and is even stronger than it ever was as far as the greater family. And it's just a really interesting process. And it starts obviously with the individual, and the individual wanting to make that change within themselves. But I cannot stress enough the family unit and how important it is to the individual success. Because, I mean, you've learned what it's like to not have a family, with your family attacking you. And that's not, it's so unstable. It's not good that they attack you like that. They should be supporting you. They should be helping you develop your individuality.
Yeah, I agree. The thing I find odd about it is I feel like out of anybody in the family this past couple of months, I've probably had my nose in the Bible more than, any of my Christian family members.
Right.
I've been watching videos of preachers and analyzing the Bible more than I did probably close to when I was going to Bible college. And while I'm looking at it at a different perspective than at the time I was going to Bible college, something that I say is the truth is not afraid of scrutiny, right? So if they believe they have the truth on their side, why in the world would they be afraid of me scrutinizing it?
Yep. Yeah, because it's not reasonable, and they're not being reasonable with it. Yeah. They want literal Skyman, because then they don't have to be responsible for their own actions and behaviors. Hey, I'm obedient. God made me do it.
Yeah.
I don't have any responsibility in that except for to obey God.
Right.
And if God is not reasonable, then, it's even easier. But once if God is, quote, reasonable, and God in fact is reason, and God lines up with reason, then you have a lot more responsibility.
Yeah. And me pointing out things that I find unreasonable, it should be easy to show me to reason why at some point it was okay to kill your kid for cursing at you or being disobedient.
Yep. And I think that this is actually kind of the message of Jesus too, where Jesus was like, the law is written on your hearts. And what was the law? The law of reason, natural law.
And so you're not a believer that Jesus is the same as the God in the Old Testament?
I see the Father is knowledge. The Son is, no, okay, sorry. There's two different metaphors. I see there's a father, mother, and child metaphor. And the father is knowledge, the mother is understanding, and the child is wisdom. So that's the creation. That's one metaphor. Then there's a different metaphor where you have, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. And that you have to go from knowledge, which is grammar, across the bridge of logic, which is Jesus, the logos, understanding, to heaven, which is God, and that's wisdom. And so to get to wisdom, to get to God, you have to cross the bridge of understanding.
Right on. So I seen on my news feed that your wife has a thing coming up, an angelic, I forget exactly what it's called.
Yeah, it's called an Angelic Reconnection Workshop.
You want to talk about that and tell me what that's about? Or
Yeah, sure. An angelic reconnection is really just getting in touch with your inner being, your higher self. If you look at kind of like the way that higher self and the angelic realm is kind of made up, it's like a fractal reality, and everything is just fractals. And you have what's called fractal trees. So if you're getting in tune with your inner being, you're a leaf and you're getting in tune with the tree branch, so to speak. And you're just reconnecting to who you really are on the inside, what some people would call your higher self. And then the angels and your guides have been incarnated on earth before, and angels have never been incarnated on earth before. But we all work together to help bring the law of reason to humanity. It's a logocentric kind of a thing. In fact, when we quote channel and we talk to them and we deal with them, it's almost like Google. So if you look at the astral realm and these other kinds of realms, the internet is like that. So if I want to go on Google and I do a search on a search engine, Google goes out into this synthetic version of the astral and gets me an answer for what I want to hear. Well, the real astral and the real angelic realms, that's the same thing. And you're just doing, quote, Google searches, and then the answer is brought to you, and then you can ask these questions. So all we're doing is helping people to reconnect to this new Google browser for these higher dimensions, so that if you have these questions, you don't have to just ask Google for it. You don't have to ask a friend for it. You can start connecting to different layers of reality, causal layers of reality, we might say. So if the manifested reality is a land of effects, when you start going into the astral and to the angelic realms, you're going into the causal realms. And so you're just looking for an answer like you would look for an answer with a browser. So we're helping people reconnect to a new internet browser and a new search engine, but in a higher level.
All right, something that at the workshop that you had last time that I was a part of, Elaine talked about her husband who had died.
Yes.
And now she has a connection with him.
Yeah.
Is that something that you've personally experienced or something like that? Or
yeah, I've talked to him. He's definitely talked to me. He's shown me things. We have a kind of like, we're a soul formation, I guess you could say. We're all connected, the three of us. He's dead, but he helps us. So he's kind of like, he helps us get in touch with the right people. So in a way, he's kind of like on Google.
Right. So I guess for me, it's kind of like I was talking to you earlier about being atheist. It's something that I don't necessarily believe there is no God.
Right.
But I haven't seen evidence of it, and so I don't believe, or I don't believe in a God.
Right.
I'm not on the opposite spectrum where I strongly believe that there is no God, where I feel the same way about this type of stuff you're talking about. What would you say for like evidence of this, or that for somebody who would just write you off as being crazy for saying something like you're saying now, which a lot of people, when they hear you talking like you're talking now, would write you off as being a crazy person.
Right. I'll say that that's fine. I'm okay with that, because I feel like I'm a very reasonable human being, and I know what I'm talking about a lot of different things, and I didn't come to this stuff lightly. Even Carl Jung, if you look at his original work, he was channeling. He had a spirit guide that was named Philemon, and he had a book called The Red Book, and you can buy that Red Book now, and it's a book of drawings and mandalas and stuff that he would draw based on the things he saw when Philemon would come to him and give you these insights. He's one of the greatest mystics and psychologists ever known to mankind. So it's not unheard of to connect psychology and mysticism together. The Gnostics, the ancient Gnostics, they were also very much into mysticism. They were into reason. The main god of mysticism is reason. Logic is the main god of mysticism. And most people don't really connect this, that these people that are really into, quote, these mystical experiences are also into natural law. They're also into reason, logic, and that they see this pattern, this self-repeating pattern of reason, kind of spreading out into the world. So it's not unheard of. It's just we've been conditioned to be overly empirical in our reason. We are one-dimensional in our logic rather than multi-dimensional in our logic. And that's what criticalthinking.org calls multi-logic. So we need to become more multi-logical. And one of those layers of logic and reason is starting to open up and expand your mind and your perception to the possibility of more than what you can see empirically.
Yeah, there's definitely more going on than what our eyes can see.
Yeah.
I know for sure that if my parents watch this video, and not just them, but pretty much anyone in the fundamental Christian faith, that it'll automatically, what you're talking about right now, be pawned off that you're speaking to a demon spirit.
Yeah, of course.
So what in your mind makes you know that you're not being guided by, that this is...
Well, because demons are about inversion. They're the inversion of logocentrism. They're the inversion of logic and reason. And if you look at what's going on with Marxism and postmodernism and deconstructionism, and they're getting rid of all of the binaries. They're getting rid of male and female. They're getting rid of reason. They're saying that it's not reasonable, and you don't have to be reasonable, and we should just go into what we desire and those kinds of things. So there's no objective truth. And that's the opposite of everything that I stand for. Logocentrism is what I stand for. Enlightenment values. You look at the Enlightenment period, with people that were even mystics like Swedenborg, but Sir Francis Bacon, a lot of those other people. That's the values that is built on Christianity and Jesus in this logocentric ideal. And anything that is an inversion of logocentrism is Satanism. In many, many, many ways. And that satanic spirit, so to speak, of inversion, of irrationality, of unconsciousness is the enemy.
Right on.
Awesome.
Well, it was nice doing a chat with you, Nathan.
Yeah, it was good chatting with you. If you enjoyed this video, please click like. If you'd like to stay up to date with my videos, please subscribe. If you would like to be notified via email whenever I release a new video, please click the bell next to subscribe. If you have any comments or questions or would like to go into a dialogue about this topic, please leave them in the comments section below. I'm Nathan Martin with the Divine Pollination Hive and the UnityProcess.com. Be safe, be sovereign, be well.